if there's a theme for today, it's about a little thing called change. And we were talking up here before we started that is it Bob Dylan, the times are changing, or is it past tense, the times have changed? That's obviously something we're going to talk about it, but one of the things that's pretty clear is people, and HR is still at the center of it all. And when we talk about people, that can be customers, taxpayers, it can be employees, et cetera. And among some of the things that will come up today are things like court rulings, whether it's at the Supreme Court level or state level. There's obviously a thing called a federal shutdown going on, which fortunately doesn't affect state and local employees here. And then there's a little thing called the First Amendment that our board occasionally has to deal with, and social media. The one thing we won't talk about, we did check on her as a potential speaker, but Taylor Swift was booked up today launching her album, so we said that sounds like a pretty good reason why you can't be here. The other part of it is changing economics and demographics, and by the way, we could probably spend about half of today talking about property taxes in Ohio, inside millage and outside millage, but we don't want to put people to sleep because that might do that. One of the things that we really emphasize and push is asking questions, and I think, Justin, if I'm right, on the table there's a little code thing there that you can, if you're shy and don't want to be on camera and standing up and asking a question, please text it. Justin will make sure it gets to us, but we want you to stay focused because, again, there's all kind of federal, national, international issues that we can debate and talk about, but we don't want to focus that way. On our board, as background, one of our members is here, Ross McGregor, over at the table there. Ross is a former state legislator, and occasionally when we're having board meetings and we talk about why did the Ohio General Assembly write it that way, or why didn't they explain a little more what that means, we like to needle him, as well as Fred Strayhorn, who's also a former legislator on our board. And also on our board, Jim Sprague, our chief administrative law judge, and I a couple weeks ago did a program for the Ohio Bar Association, and we noted that on our board and having hearings, we really like having good attorneys, and there's a number of attorneys here because when you've got good attorneys, they tend to be a little more focused on the actual issues instead of just throwing a bunch of things against the wall and hope something fits. As background, there's been a little debate nationally on what does civil service, merit service mean, but one of the important things in Ohio is there is a lot of history with civil service because obviously part of what kicked it off was an Ohio president named Garfield who got assassinated by a disgruntled office holder. And then when the federal government first started the ball rolling, the thing called the Pendleton Act, that was done by a U.S. senator from Cincinnati, which ultimately led to the civil service. And of importance in Ohio is the fact that in the state constitution, Article 15, Section 10, merit and what means civil service is actually mentioned there. And of course, Ohio Revised Code 124 is very clear in terms of detailing things, plus all the court decisions that have come up. And one other thing about State Board of Personnel Review, we aren't just state employees. We also deal a lot with county employees, university employees, and then there's some cases, civil service commissions, other areas that we get into. And I might also mention a couple housekeeping duties. One, for candid camera purposes, if any of you are in the witness protection plan and are a little shy, there's cameras back there, and we post this on our website so you could go back and see past years, like 2 years ago when these two fine experts did a program on social media. Some of our past programs, this will be posted on there, so if you want to go back and rewatch and say, did they really say that, you can check it. Or if you want to share with somebody, see, I told you so, here's what they said, you can show them on the website. A couple housekeeping items. One, the most important question is the restrooms are out that way and to the left. People always ask that question. And as I mentioned, we can text questions during the program. And also, if you've got a question, put your hand up and Justin or one of the staff members will come around with the mic. Lunch will be at 11:45 in the open area outside the doors here. And in between the after lunch, the first and the second program, there'll be some cookies, and usually in the past they're cookies. I went out and snuck beforehand. I like the oatmeal raisins. So hopefully their tradition continues of having very good cookies and other things. So I mentioned the evaluation forms are very important because we really want to know what are topics that you want to hear about in the future. And also there'll be certificates of attendance for those that need CLEs. Our first two speakers were superstars in the past when they did some things on social media, which they'll cover some starting at 10 o'clock. But the topic, managing up or down, you might kind of wonder, what does that really mean? Well, part of it is because all of us, even at the top level, if you're a governor, sometimes find out the legislature will veto items. You might be a mayor, you might be a county commissioner, but there's always legally by law or other things that limit you up and down. But part of the challenge is there's always somebody above you, there's always people below you. How do you manage when you're caught in the middle? And our two speakers have some excellent insights. And in terms of brief bio on them, Larry James is not only for the past 20 plus years been national, not Ohio, but national general counsel, Fraternal Order of Police, one of the largest labor organizations in the United States, but also as a former safety director in Columbus, where he conducted hearings and had to decide police and fire and others. And of course, many years as practicing law, including as a managing partner. And Jonathan Downs, one way to quickly summarize it, he wrote the book on Ohio civil service law. So he didn't quite get the tablets on the mountaintop, but he kind of wrote the book, which in my book is pretty close. So they're both superstars. And after they did their presentation 2 years ago, they were kind of doing here as a warm-up for a program they did in Boston for a little group called the American Bar Association, which is pretty impressive, and they wowed the audiences there as they did here. So they're going to open by talking about managing up and down, and I'm going to sit there with them in case they either get out of control or the audience gets out of control to jump in there. But so I don't know whether Larry or Jonathan's going to go first, but the stage is all yours, and these are true, not just Ohio experts, but national experts. Thank you.
Well, most of you know Jonathan because he interacts with a lot of you. I don't interact with a lot. I deal with some of the DD organizations around the state and the county mental health boards. I've been general counsel for the National Fraternal Order of Police since '01. You know, people ask me, how did I get that job? You know, and it goes back to the days when I was a safety director for Columbus over police, fire, and communications. And I had a policy when I came in that if you were going to get a bad cop, get him or her the right way. Don't bring me made up, drummed up stuff. It took the group, the executive staff, a while to understand that. At that time, I didn't know as I was making those decisions. Terry will tell you, during the tenure as safety director, almost every day or 2 times a week, I was a lead story. Safety director overrules the chief. By the end of that time with the chief realized I was his friend, and we tried to create good policies, sound policies, which the officers knew about consistency and fairness and the process. That's number one. Number two, we had a gentleman on the Supreme Court by the name of Andy Douglas at that time, and he called me and he said, I have a friend running for the president of the National Fraternal Order of Police. Would you support him? Well, I had a Supreme Court asking me, and I appeared before the Supreme Court. I just wanted to be in good standing, so I wrote a check for $1,000. Steve Young from Marion, Ohio, stopped by the office for a 5-minute chat to say thank you for that check. And the argument, an argument pursued and went on for 2 hours. We were talking about black folks, cops, and the issues of politics. And the justice was there, and he got very nervous. Steve left, called me 2 weeks later, said, I'm going out to Denver. I'm unimposed. I would like you to become general counsel. I said, what does that take? He said, you're a smart guy. You'll figure it out. And so through that, I've been through 3 presidents. The last exchange of the presidents, Pat Yost is our current president. I get along extremely well, probably as well as any president we have had. But when he was coming on board, everyone, including myself, knew I was going to be fired. At one point, he had said something like, you're not going to make it with me. But after he got elected, enough people weighed in and we had a conversation. He said, you're a smart guy. I think we can work together. Let's move forward. My other client on the other extreme is a Kettering Foundation out of Dayton, Ohio. Kettering is a very progressive institution. We're dealing with the administration and its executive orders. For you all who've seen what this administration has sent out to colleges, universities, and non-government entities as to what they want to say is a politically administrative right position to take. So I have to deal with that on that side. I also represent the Columbus Urban League and a number of other not-for-profit organizations. So we deal with DEI funding issues, language. We deal with the conflict issues from the City of Columbus with the City Attorney's Office. But the one thing I've learned over my time period is that we are all, without exception, simply just the help. And the people that don't understand that more often get it wrong than right. I've been married for 36 years, so I definitely get it right that I know who the boss is in the house. I think that's very, very clear. During these economic, difficult, shifting cultural times, the times they have changed. And we're dealing with some issues right now that we've never dealt with in the law. The questions I get from various clients is, what does this executive order mean? What does this policy change mean? How do we work around it? And so we kind of shift and draft and accommodate so we don't find ourselves in harm's way, whether that's funding. I know some of you are funded by some pass-through dollars or some tax dollars. You know, Terry talked about that. You know, what do you do when that source dries up, or how do you make your case? So I've had a great career, and I really enjoyed it. I'm with a firm right now of Amundsen Davis. Before that, the law firm was Crabb, Brown, and James. We're a 75-year-old law firm. I made the decision that if I didn't have this merger or acquisition, it was an acquisition, let me be clear. It wasn't a merger. They have 260 lawyers. We had 10 lawyers. And I went from being a benevolent dictator to asking permission and filling out forms. So that's what brings me here today. And I've known Terry Casey forever. We go back from the early days when Franklin County was all Republican without exception. Democrats need not apply. Now it's the complete opposite. Republicans need not apply in Franklin County. So with that, Jonathan?
That's why I moved to Licking County. Good morning, everybody. I know many of you in the audience, and I know of some more of you as well. The mixture of the audience today is fascinating to me. Look at your list. You'll see who's here and who's not here. But we're looking at the development of where this is evolving in terms of public sector employment. When you look at public sector employment, there's three factors to it. There's politics, there's people, and there's the public. Okay, when the bottom line of all of this is, yeah, you have to deal with the people, yeah, you have to deal with politics, but it's the people and of the public that we all serve. I'm a salaried employee of a law firm, but our money is generated from you, so I serve the public as well. Every time I sit down at the table, my mind is, what are we doing over here? A lot of competition out there in a lot of different areas. I know we have some law enforcement people in here as well, so we'll talk a little bit about a couple of points on recruitment, retention, and what that means. But we're going to hit on some highlights and some bullet points along the line. So I want to make sure that in terms of the history, because one of the things that I get to do now is I teach a graduate course at Fisher College, at Ohio State University, and it's management level human resource students. These people are going to be taking care of us in the future. They will be here long after me, obviously, and they will be here taking care of the rest of us. And these young people are excellent. They are bright, they are smart, and they're moving forward, and they get it. The other thing I want to speak on AI a little bit later, but the AI is involved at the university as well. So the two classes I teach there, one's on collective bargaining and labor relations history, and also the other one is on employment law for human resource management. And that's been a real awakening for me, because the questions that come from these students who haven't been out in the world, or most of them haven't been out in the world, is how does this work? What does this mean? What are we doing? You are the people who are going to be able to answer those questions as well. But if you look at the labor history, and I'm going to bring labor into this because many of you have union contracts, the unions actually started when? Right after the Black Plague. You remember that, right?
Not quite. I'm not that old.
Well, the guilds began after the Black Plague, and they've continued since then until today. What we have is Ohio is the last large urban state to become organized with a collective bargaining bill. So we've seen a lot happen there as well. So the key thing that I want to bring out is, throughout this, we're going to talk about what it means to be in the public service. We're going to talk about what the public sentiment is. We're talking a little bit about the economy and how it impacts and what we're doing here. At 10 o'clock, we're going to shift over to the social media presentation. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get there. But please, ask the questions. You've got the scan to do that as well. With that, Larry, you want to kick off with a point you want to raise, or?
No, I think
Go from
that,
there.
Obviously we have 370,000 members as a part of the national FOP, so we deal with it from the legislative side of it. One of the things we were able to achieve, and it's a long race, it's not a sprint. We talked about the windfall elimination tax, had been around. We had worked on that bill for 40 years. And so sometimes politics can work to your favor. As that issue came up for the 40th year, the FOP was lobbying Congress. The Democrats usually supported that bill without exception. The Republicans killed that bill without exception. That was the brainstorm on the windfall elimination. So the president, and I did not want to go into the White House. My wife would kill me. So I have to honor that. But we put the strategy together, and I said and suggested to the executive board, push Schumer and the Democrats to bring that bill forward. Bring it forward. And we got to the point where they were going to try to substitute a bill for it, and I said, don't let that happen. Once it got to the point that it was to be voted on, I said, go down to Mar-a-Lago, talk to Trump. The FOP had endorsed Trump early on. That was the politics of, the trade-off. And I said, have him weigh in on the Republican elected officials in Congress and the Senate, and have him make the calls. Guess what happened? He made the calls. The Republicans didn't kill the bill. I say that because in the public sector, when we as public servants, we really don't have a God per se, except the people we serve. And I think the idea, whether it's the Civil Service Commission, whether it's a city council, whether it's the mayor, how do you play that politics? You play it for good government. And I fundamentally believe that. I mean, I tell this story when I was first appointed general counsel in the FOP. All my black friends thought I was crazy. But have you lost your mind? And I said, you've got to be in the room. If you opt out or you paint this person as your enemy, I don't want to talk to that individual. And one of the cliches I use all the time, if I had something to do over, what would I do differently? I would have picked my enemies a hell of a lot more carefully. So I think when you're dealing with the world you deal with, and you're trying to create policy, push policy forward, that is the type of give and take you have to have. One of Terry may remember this when we decided that we were going to take all police shootings to the grand jury for the city of Columbus and Franklin County. At that point in time, we had a Democrat-led council, Republican mayor. And I got to be involved in that. So my history was kind to work through things. I think those efforts and your commitment to excellence to bring forward the right policies. And also when you have those tough issues, that you're going to face when you have public scrutiny is how do you do it when it's a storm? Well, you got to come through it. And I think if you're consistent, your communications are clear, concise. Terry, during my days as safety director, I worked with Buck Reinhardt. And I remember one day he called me down, and this was the old pen. Many of you may not be old enough to remember the old pens. He said, I want you to round up, you tell the cops to round up the crooks, we're going to put them in the pen and shoot them. And I said, Mayor, I'm not going to do that. And then the other thing he did, which, think about this, when we first had the concept of AIDS really coming forward, he called me down and he said, I want you to create me a policy to address this issue in the safety forces, and how are you going to do it? And I said, Mayor, I need to consult the health officials. I need to consult the doctors. He goes, you have till Monday. You have 48 hours to get me a damn policy, because I'm going to hold a press conference and I'm going to take it, and this is going to be the policy, and then I'm going to say you defend it. So your world is not always going to be safe. You're not always going to have the quality time. It's not always going to be rational, but you have to remain rational. And to the extent you can push back on those insane policies, sometimes it just doesn't make sense, that's your job. Fail better, do your best. And that's where I think we have really made our difference. And God knows I have that when I'm representing the national FOP, when I'm going into various city after all hell's broken loose.
Follow up on the windfall tax that happened fairly quick from a political standpoint this year. 40 years of preparation, but who's counting? Things change slowly, then they change fast. I did not expect this administration to endorse modifying the marijuana laws, the laws regarding marijuana. I expected it in the last administration. What happened? Someone visited Mar-a-Lago with a check, and so now the administration is backing the issue. Yes, that's how the politics work in Washington. Yes, that's how the politics work in Columbus and other places as well. So the lesson there is always keep your eye on the horizon, see what's coming down the pike. For anybody who has a CDL licensed employees, that's going to be a question that comes up. I dealt with that at a conference I spoke at on Wednesday for the American Public Works Association. We had a whole bunch of questions about marijuana and CDL licenses. So that's another issue that those of you who have it, keep it on the horizon. I would like to throw out a couple of things, and we'll go back and forth on this. I'm not even really sure where to begin, but I'll begin with the topic of the workforce. What are we seeing out there? We're seeing change with the DEI issue. Now, that's a law issue, but how is that affecting at the lower level? The push now is toward meritocracy. We're looking at civil service law, which is merit-based selection system, merit-based promotion. So we never really left it in Ohio. It's always been here, and it will continue to be here because it's baked into, incorporated in our Constitution. But with that meritocracy, and because we are responsible to the public, there are accountability to the public for the performance by our employees. I'm hearing a series of wellness programs and performance appraisal systems in law enforcement. Haven't heard that in years. Performance appraisals for law enforcement officers, many police chiefs who grew up through the ranks are now looking at that in their particular departments because of being able to institute new programs and new plans. We're also seeing and I call it management's responsibilities. It's not management's rights. I mean, that's what the statute says in 4117. But it's management's responsibilities. So each of you are responsible for the efficient delivery of services to the public. You have the certain rights within which you do it, but each one of those are a responsibility. So, and then when we get to that table, then we get to the real fun part, the work-life balance. How much time off do I get? Do I have to come to work? Remote work. Do I have to come to work? When do I have to come to work? And so we're looking at that in the work-life balance of work schedules. One of the key issues being pushed right now is parental leave. Is that the right thing to do? Is it the fair thing to do? How do you cover for the absences of somebody who's not there? So with the cultural change, with the growth in the workforce, the change in the workforce, and when I would say growth, I'd have to say not as much growth as before. We're not seeing as many people enter the workforce. Watch the unemployment numbers, because we also need to know where in the state that the people are and where they're working from. And the one that has come up a couple of times for us are service animals versus comfort animals. All right, so how many dorms in the universities now allow a student to bring a comfort animal with them to their dorm room, as opposed to a service animal, which is out there? And a service animal, to me, is a real issue, especially if someone has PTSD. But how do you work through that? So many of the challenges, some of the new challenges are coming up also in the area of contract negotiations. But many of you out here, probably half, I would think, Terry, don't have unions. But you have employees, and you have all the same issues that anyone else has. Even if you're not civil service, some of these jurisdictions out here are not civil service covered, but you'll have the same issues going on. In the area of the laws, we see the change in the DEI programs. We're working with a number of universities, no one in here with this issue, but the DEI programs that Senate Bill 1 have as a prohibited topic for collective bargaining, and it cannot be negotiated with the union. So there's certain things that are prohibited from discussions. That bill went through development for about 14 months, and it went through the legislature in about 14 days. Fast and furious, and so we're dealing with that as well. And then the changes in the laws, which are, I think, are more cultural. The PWFA. Anybody know what PWFA stands for? Stu, you remember that one. It's the Public and Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, right? You got it. So we have that layered on top of the ADA, on top of the PDA, on top of Title VII. So we now have what I call a nice combination of laws to protect women in the workplace. And it's very important. So when I talked to a group of fire chiefs last Saturday at their annual training, I walked them through all the steps of all the laws that protect women in the fire service, where women are not in the majority by any stretch of the imagination, but they're one of the workforces which have to address and deal with women coming into the workforce, which to me is a long overdue entry level. So those are some of the issues. I've got a couple more on the list here, but we're flipping back and forth, making sure we cover a lot of bases for you.
And I think the other thing, the winds shift, the times have changed, and they'll change again. One of my experiences with this concept of affirmative action, or DEI, I spent 11 years as a board member of the Board of Trustees of Kenyon College. And one of the feathers in one's cap is to be made chairman of the admissions committee. It is bogus. Kenyon is about $80,000 a year. It is elite, privileged school. And when I went in that, and I'm looking at the percentage, we're always trying to increase our diversity count. And what I looked at on that issue was how could we increase that participation without lessening the quality or the standards of students. This administration is, as their mandates to college and university, is to reimpose testing on everything. So I think you're going to see that come down the pipe, and money is going to be tied to that. But as I got into this thing on admissions at Kenyon College, what I realized at that time, 55% of our student body was full pay. You could not mess with that because it financed the university. And you only had so much dollars to meet the needs students. So I took about 5 applicants, and I went through this process, and I said, let's see which ones you would admit. We had 3 extraordinary non-majority students that should have been admitted under any circumstances. We didn't have the money. Everyone that is admitted to those type of colleges without exceptions are qualified. The graduation rates are what they are. You will see that. I think the other thing that came into play for me are programs that we put forward. One of the things my wife and I have done for 20 years, I think Terry may be aware of this, we created the African American Leadership Academy. That academy is individuals between the age of 25 and 45. And it gives them, it's a 360 program that tests, who you are, and those fellows are the project. We make them better. And I remember we had the debate of, what should we do? Should we change that? I said, you're crazy, because it's been the pipeline for Central Ohio and participants on boards, jobs. Sometimes it's led to divorces because one of the individuals in there has outgrown the other one. But my point is, don't lose sight of what America is fundamentally about. And if you have people who participate in that. One of the things I deal with clients, and I get this all over, particularly when we have a potential black plaintiff and, employers trying to decide, are we going to take disciplinary action? How are we going to take disciplinary? What are the actions? And I always look, what is your track record? What have you done, whether that's a PIP program of that employee? Are you treating that individual similarly situated to your other individuals? Because that's where you're going to run into your problems. And then you also have the retaliation. That is the mother load. Mm-hmm. Because, employer takes action, the employee responds, maybe on a First Amendment type right or something else, and then retaliation. That's where most clients run into problems. So I think you just have to be sensitive to those issues. I remember Jim Nichols, who used to be treasurer at Ohio State University, and he was trying to diverse some of the financial advisors. And he was worried because of perception that this was an affirmative action situation. I said, Jim, treat black folks just like you treat white folks. If you hire them, they don't work, fire their ass. It's very simple. Bring them along, but don't have this timid situation. And that's what I did as safety director, without exception. I said, look, I don't care who you are, what color, what gender you are. If you screw up, I'm going to have your behind. And we did the same thing with hiring. Now that gets tricky because I think you look at the testing and you try to deal with the maturity, what you need on the force, where individuals are going to serve. Are you going to, can you have a white undercover detective in an all-black crime-fested neighborhood? Well, you can, but it's not going to be that effective. So don't be stupid. Did I say that right, too?
Yeah, right on time.
Yeah. Let me chime in. When we talked about this topic, one area that came up that kind of surprised me is obviously there's questions of gender and accommodation and that kind of thing, but I think either Larry or Jonathan chimed in a little bit on religion might be a new thing and how accommodation. So maybe you want to touch a little on that, whether there's things like religion or there's some other areas that are bubbling legally in the courts.
Yeah. I think on the religious front, I said this, I was a keynote speaker at the Federalist Society. Don't ask me how I got invited. But they booed me. And they booed me on a religious issue. And I think where we saw the court going, we see where the court's going. It is the most progressive development in legal propositions and concept in America today. That is the one, whether you talk about children getting time off to go and pray, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I have doubts about my doubts, but that doesn't control anything. I think the idea that if you have someone that makes that request for a religious accommodation, you better talk to your counsel very carefully and what that entails if it's not a disruptor to the workforce. But I've seen this coming, and I told our folks at the FOP and how they represent those individuals on the force who may have certain religious and accommodations.
Well, and we're seeing it worldwide. The attack in London this week at a Jewish synagogue. We're going to see it again. Nothing fires up people to do ugly, nasty things more than religion. And so in the workplace, it's going to be your job as well to keep that. So the laws are changing. The laws are being interpreted by those who are on the bench at the time. And so it's really important for you to see how that may affect you long-term, short-term, whatever you're working with. But the religion, the accommodation issue, the retaliation issue is where we see most of it. There's a recent case out of Kentucky, Northern District of Kentucky, over in Covington, where a firefighter quit the job because he was being harassed because of his religious beliefs. So some of that has to do, for those of you who have fire departments, firehouses are the last frat houses. You ever heard the word hazing? Stop it. But we create an environment where in a firehouse there are going to be 4 to 10 people at a time, depending on the size of the firehouse and the number of apparatus in there. So look at this as a microcosm of how you deal with an issue. The same 4 to 8 people are with each other 1 out of every 3 days for 24 hours at a time. What are they going to talk about? Each other and their health. Therein comes your ADA issue and your FMLA issue and so forth. So training your people how to behave themselves in the firehouse, in the clerk's office, in the law department, wherever, is your responsibility. It's called civility. And some of that happens in the cases we see coming out because there's also the culture within the fire service and within the police services as well, law enforcement. Also, we have this, the camaraderie, and that's extremely important. People need to work together closely. They need to work together elbow to elbow. But when a female firefighter is restocking in a supply booth, and a male firefighter comes up behind her and touches her inappropriately with, I need not say more. Those kind of antics are the kinds of things that kindergarten teachers teach the children the first day they come into class. Something about your hands, right? So those kinds of basic things that we're looking at constantly, and that's what we're seeing. But with the religious issue, I find that be one that's much bigger than basic fundamentals, because that is shifting, and we're seeing the shift in lawsuits as well, discrimination lawsuits as well, because the best part about the Title VII, you sue somebody, you go through the routes, you get your right to sue letter. And I like to always say this, Larry, I always ask this question: what's the last clause in Title VII and some of the other discrimination laws? The lawyer gets paid. You pay their lawyer and you pay your lawyer. If you lose, you're paying both as well as a penalty. Prevention up front will help a lot in that. There's a question, then I'm going to go back to the engagement issue and the testing.
Suggestions for dealing with the newer generations and their maturity levels.
You know, I'm gonna come at that a couple ways, having been managing partner for a number of years, and I'll just tell you my mindset so you figure out who I am. When COVID hit, when the firms when we got acquired by the other firm and we were trying to get people to move from those, come back to work, and it was tough. And this generation particularly is adverse to that. And one of my partners told the overall new law firm, well, here's what Larry did. After 3 weeks of this COVID thing, he said, get your shot, get your mask, and get your butt back to the office. So we've never left the office. But here's the thing that's happened as my responsibilities have changed, and I just took 3 of my law partners down to our place in Florida for a 3-day retreat golf. And it was, it was intergenerational. And what I was trying to do is create some common ground about the future of the law firm. So I think you have to be very intentional. It has to make sense. It has to be incentivized, because everybody wants to make the maximum amount of money that they can make. You can't do that if you're disengaged. And what I tell our young lawyers, and I think what you all do in particular, from the diversity of policies, If you're not in the room, you can't learn, you can't grow, you can't share. And how do you do that? I mean, we came up, we're kind of the mutts. We're the last maybe generation of the mutts that we were thrown in the fire, like, go play, show up, you know, and you had that kind of independence. This generation doesn't have that. They don't see the value in it. So the question for each office that you're going to have is, how do you put together kind of some exchanges? Here's the other issue I had when I did this trip. I just got back Wednesday night. The women came to me and they said, when do we get to go? When are you taking us down there? And my wife, she was hitting me going, you really need to figure that out. And if you need me to go down with you and you invite the women, you got to do that, and you got to do it in the next 3 months. So I think that holistic approach as to how you grow a generation, how you share that maturity, how you tackle that issues. I talk about cultural competence, in particular with our lawyers, and I say, you know, we have some racial issues that you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of understanding, appreciating, addressing, and you don't know how to talk to people because it's a different culture. How do you teach that? You can't do that from a distance. You can't do that with 3 days at the workplace, and particularly with the politics that we are experiencing today.
Oh, my dad said, go to work. I grew up on a farm. But there was a basketball court inside the barn. So every night the lights were on and we played basketball. But you're absolutely right. The play now is organized play. I mean, my grandsons, it's all organized play. Lacrosse, swimming, basketball, baseball, it's all organized play. And that means there's less opportunity to just be free and do something different. I sit on the board of a charter school. We send all of our teachers and administrators to Top Golf for a day. Have fun. Go play golf. If that's golf. I don't know what golf is. I'll drive the cart, but that's as far as I'm going to go, Larry. I threw my clubs away. Spent too much money on golf balls because I lost them all. But the cultural competency is not just limited to jurisdictions like the city of Columbus.
Yep.
And I grew up in an Appalachian county. Cultural competence means, do I understand the people who are around me all the time? Fortunately, a little town near me had a black population, Italian population, and I ate, which meant I ate well. But I had the opportunity for multiple cultures growing up as a kid, as a farm kid in Carroll County. But I think the key thing is the engagement is important. The people staying at home and not working. There are some opportunities that are relevant for remote work, but it's going to take a lot of work to do that. In fact, in the state contract, I don't think there's anybody in here who's under the state contract. The state contract now has a provision about remote work. It says it can happen if. There's a long list of the ifs behind that. But it's something that works its way up the ladder. My daughter is in industrial design. They have remote workers around the world because that's their talent pool. But if you're working for the public, the public needs to see who it is that they're working with. Was there another question? Here it comes.
It says, City of Mount Vernon, question, if the Chaplains Association wants to establish a voluntary Bible study with a Christian emphasis at the municipal center for city employees to attend, are there issues with this, with that we're not seeing?
Well, so the question, as I understand it, is Mount Vernon wants to create kind of a religious program that people can attend, that public officials can attend on city time. Is that the question?
I think I know where this is going. Bible study? Oh, there are lots of cases on that.
Is that on city time, or is that outside of city time or outside of government hours? release time of something.
There's lots of cases on that back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, because you got a state division state.
Hey, Jonathan. Always here to cause a stir.
That old concept of respecting division between state and church
So
is
the
melting.
The question was, the Chaplains Association, which is a third party, would like to establish that either 30 minutes before or 30 minutes after traditional working hours. And due to
okay.
the multiple divisions that
Yeah.
we have.
Tanner,
Yeah.
there's a series of cases, we're thinking like maybe late 70s, a series of cases on the division of church and state, and where they're allowed to go would be a public, basically it has to be a public area, it has to be non-work time, obviously, but I think you're seeing the swing of LifeWise into the public sector, into public employment. LifeWise is the program, Christian churches having students come out of the school during the day. So we're seeing the next step of that. I haven't seen it specifically addressed, but there are, there's got to be at least more than 50 cases on that somewhere out there, and it's probably in the discrimination law handbook that we have. But if they want to create a program, you're going to have to be careful. It has to be open to everybody, and you have to open it up to other religious groups as well. And then you get into, if it's a group that the city council doesn't like, too bad. On the flip side of it is, can you prohibit it entirely in terms of whether or not a religious group is prohibited versus another group? So the question then would be, Tanner, what's the policy about the public using public space, wherever you are at City Hall, the Memorial Hall, or whatever space that the city has. But in terms of release for employees, pretty clear, it has to be on unpaid time, it has to be strictly voluntary, and it has to be, if you open it up to one, it's going to be opened up to everybody.
Yeah, I think that fundamentally just saying not on government time, not on government property, that would be the argument. Now, some folks are creeping over there, but I think that's the better rule of thumb.
The problem, the one challenge will be if you allow other groups to use public property.
Yep. What's
What's the difference to this group than another group? So it would be one to look at a broad policy. It's kind of like social media. Some social media posts, Facebook posts from police departments don't filter anything. Others don't allow anything. So the question is, what do you do up front? And it's got to be pretty much a universal application.
But, I think that what this raises is the issue of political correctness and the ability to have civil discussions where you have disagreements. We all run from those type of facilitation. If you have a common lunch area, someone wants to be a Pelosi, the other one wants to be a Trumpite. How do you do that? One of the stories I tell to the FOP members, I learned, and it was a very painful. Like I said, my wife and I have been married for 36 years. I love her dearly. I think she loves me most of the time. But when George Floyd happened, the most hell I caught was at home, and she wanted to understand, we'd gone through Ferguson, I'd been involved in that, and I told everyone the way Ferguson was going to turn out. That was an Obama DOJ. I knew we had no credibility, so we went to the Department of Justice to have them to investigate and write the report on Ferguson. And so she remembers that, and she basically said, I don't want to hear that shit again. So I go, oh, okay. So, for 2 weeks, I'm just catching hell at home. And the situation happened in Atlanta, and I was on a webcast or Zoom with about 250 people. And Donna was on that, my wife was on that with me. And I got home and she said, you were brilliant. You weren't snarky. You listened and you responded intelligently without being judgmental. And I'm thinking, we've been married for 30 years. My God, don't you know I mean, well, I just didn't want to have these kind of discussions with you. But, so what I told the FOP, particularly in Illinois, I said, I want you to understand, this is not personal. And I told them that story of that experience I learned from that encounter with my wife, that, sometimes, things are too personal for us, whether it's religion, whether it's race, whether it's gender, and how do you have those discussions with people in the workplace and doing your job that you can make a difference or you can raise the intelligence of the discussion. And that's a thing that really sticks with me and I use time and time again, because it's not personal. People are trying to find their own quality and peace. Let's help them.
And that is the workplace conduct standards and the civility standards. One follow-up on the religion in the workplace. A workplace, the public sector, is a laboratory. It's so, if there's religious speech going on, off duty. The other part of it comes at, are you going to allow employees to have different religious symbols at their workstations? Do you allow them to wear a crucifix or a Star of David? So what does your dress code have to do with the workplace as well? So bring that back to religion. Also, do you allow posters for whatever issue or cause for employees? The workplace in the public sector is a laboratory. It needs to be kept clean of outside opinions. We'll show you more of this when we get to the social media issue. But when you cross that threshold, when an employee crosses that threshold over the door into the workplace, and it doesn't have to be a physical threshold, they are now a public employee. They have a higher standard of conduct expected because they are paid by the public. Freedom of speech is a different issue for public employees on different levels. We'll talk about that in the social media issue because that's the underlying legal issue on freedom of speech.
And I think, one of the things two things that experience I had, I love the old memorabilia where whites only, colored only, and some of the folks from the FOP had found it at a sale and gave it to me. And I had it cleaned up, I had it framed, and I had it in my office until someone, and a person who happened to be black, that was offended by it. And they raised the issue, and I'm going, my God, this is history. But so you have to be very careful in that space, I think as Jonathan says. The other thing I had was a totem pole, and at the top it had Jesus, Satan, Hitler, Martin Luther King, and Elvis. And the caption was, be they good or be they evil, these few have influenced millions. And when a new firm came in, they said, that's got to go. So, their question.
Yes, Christine was asking about exemptions regarding vaccines. In this case, health department that contracts to the local school district.
It's old.
Wow.
Putting the children at risk.
It's old.
I love vaccines. What an issue. Has it time yet? Is it break? The lawsuits are pretty simple. If the employer requires it, the employee has to do it. But the employer has to have a basis for doing so. Are employees allowed to refuse it? The answer is no if there's a policy in place. And the lawsuits, which started out of COVID, are now coming to conclusion. And most of them are dismissing the employees' lawsuits for being fired because they refused a vaccine, except
Religious
religion.
Religious
So what kind of religion do you have today?
Yeah. Well, I think, look.
Bona fide.
Look, when we were representing, there was also that nod and wink about the exceptions and the religious and the requirements of what it meant to have that kind of objection. But religion is the one clear objection. With this administration, with this director of health, I don't know anymore, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
I don't either. I
don't know. I wouldn't bet the ranch on the enforceability with the way Kennedy has dealt with and hold debate on vaccines. I would look hard at that.
It's a disruptive era in a lot of era right now where we are. But there's the one phrase that I repeat often, which is, learn history or be doomed to repeat history. Okay? Learn it.
I think you can definitely, maybe I shouldn't say this. Vaccines aren't going to hurt anybody. But I think those employees that have the objections to them, whether it's medical or whether it's religion, I think is a new day and maybe a new consideration. So just be cautious and cognizant of that.
If it's religion, there's a whole series of cases which outline whether or not it's a bona fide religious belief. So it's already there. The standards are already there. That is, learn the law, learn the history, work for it, work through that as well. I will roll back real quick for just one point, back to testing and talk about civil service law. One of the things in civil service that you can do, and if you're under civil service, or if you're not under civil service, you should be thinking about this anyway, is having a process that's a blind application process, similar to what Larry was talking about with Kenyon College, but also how to increase the pool, how to increase the pool of people. For many years, law enforcement was moving forward with requiring associate's degrees and a bachelor's degree, and now they're back to, if you graduated high school and you can get through the peace officer certification program, we got you. Okay, and part of that has to do with the available workforce, but also part of it has to do with, do all these kids need to go to college? Of course, unless it's Kenyon, they definitely need to go to Kenyon. I live outside of Granville, and that's Denison, the nemesis of Kenyon. So look at that as well. So the engagement process is currently, how do you get people in the door to work for you doing what? That's the engagement process. You can have a merit system that tests a lot of different things, but the ability of a person to do the job is what you're looking for downstream. And we need to bring people, younger people, into the workforce sooner than we're bringing them into the public sector. We're not bringing them in young enough right now. So they're not, the culture for the society is out there. Of all the students who are in my classes, in the last 3 years at Ohio State University, 1 went into public sector. 1. And she works for the city of Westerville. Thank you.
I have a question for you gentlemen, and I know both of you, and so I'm going to ask you a really hard question and see how you do with it. But honestly, over the years when I worked in HR, I got a lot of questions from managers that worked in the public sector about how can they do their job in such a way that they can respectfully disagree with superiors, offer them the best advice sometimes, offer them the best options sometimes, but be faithful to their duties and the law, but also be loyal and be respectful of the people, their superiors that they have to serve. Whether it be an ethical dilemma, whether it be an HR dilemma, could be how to discipline, could be whether or not someone qualifies for FMLA. How do HR people navigate those issues with their superiors?
I think that I would say the ethical consideration for me is the prevailing issue. If it's a philosophical issue, that's different. Whether you believe in something or not. But look, we see, for instance, only using this administration as an example, with the Comey indictment. You either resign or you're going to be fired. The question is, how important is this issue to your principal? And I would say that if you're wrestling with that issue, hopefully you have some type of kitchen cabinet that you can bounce off. You can have this discussion. Am I being reasonable or unreasonable? Is my superior, my boss, being a jerk, being biased, things of that sort? Never break the law under any circumstances. Never violate the code of ethics or the ethics of the state of Ohio, because that can get you indicted. But I think you need to really have a healthy, mature discussion with someone, your colleagues, as to what you're wrestling with. And at the end of the day, and, you know, God knows you need your health care, you need your money, and, you know, if your family's dependent on it, you know, can you survive? I had a situation where an employee came to me and she felt that this individual was requiring her to do things that were unethical. And it happened to be in the private sector, and she happened to be making about $600,000 a year. And I'm going through this thing, and she said, oh, by the way, he's going to be gone in 6 months. I said, write him out. So depending on where the election cycle is or the appointment cycle is, so that's the best advice I can give you. But really digest and make sure you're not being a knucklehead or you're just not being principled without purpose.
Listen, in the military, there is a phrase, may I speak freely. When I say listen, I mean tell them they need to tell you what their issue is and why. Not that they just disagree with it, but walk through the reasons why they believe. We have ethics standards for public employees throughout Ohio. We have the Ohio Ethics Commission, and you have the state auditor's office. If it involves money, they're going to prosecute you. So you have certain ethics that you have to follow as well. But to answer the question directly, I would say, ask them why. Why is this your opinion? Tell me. And if they don't have the rationale, just say, I appreciate it. And if they have a rationale, but you differ, FMLA questions, ADA questions, remote work questions, we can come up with a laundry list of about 1,000 items. But they need to tell you the why. If you need to document it, then have it. And then you instruct them, or you indicate to them, I've heard you, I understand your position, this is the decision, we now move forward. Because in the military, you have the opportunity to speak your mind. And my son was a captain in the Army, and this is how he worked with his subordinates. But at the end of the day, or at the end of the conversation, they followed orders. He followed orders. And that's the instruction. So they had the opportunity to say their piece. There's a three-triangle diagram by Professor Budd out of Minnesota, whose labor relations materials I used in my class. It's voice, equity, and economics. The first two deal with employees. The voice issue, and that's what we're seeing a lot of as well in negotiations. Employees want a voice in the organization. Now, this person may or may not have done their research, but if they have, use it. You might have a eureka moment there as well. But absolutely have them say their piece, and then indicate, that's good, I appreciate it, but now you need to move forward. This is the way it's going to be. Your concerns and objections have been noted, but here's the other side of the story. Because it will help, it will work through the issues many times. Don't just shut them down. Listen carefully, because that's the voice.
I thought the question was from the subordinate's perspective, was it not?
Just the person in HR.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was I thought it was from the subordinate. Because I think that's the one, I think he's absolutely right from, that level of, managing down, but managing up, just keep this in mind. If that personality is going to not hear you at hello, and matter of fact, you're on thin ice, you really need to be careful of that and go home, take 48 hours, digest it, figure out what the price of your principles are.
Thank you. The managing up means, what are you going to tell your superiors? Again, same concept, in my opinion. You have to have it. You have to have the rationale, the reasons, and the basis, and then move it up from there.